Welcome to the Conflict Stories podcast with Sam and Scott, where real people share their professional and personal stories of conflict.
Whether you're looking for advice or the comfort of knowing you're not alone, Conflict Stories brings the human and positive side of conflict to the forefront.
Tune in, connect, learn, and transform. Welcome to our next episode of Conflict Stories with me, Sam Hardy, and Scott Dutton. I'm joining you today on the lands of the Kaurna and Peramunk people up in the Adelaide Hills, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present.
Yes, and I am in Byron on Bundjalung country, and we have our wonderful guest Mayur today. What lands are you on, Mayur?
I am on Banarang land, Melbourne Bayside. And I also pay my respect to all the elders past, present and emerging.
I want to introduce Mayur to you today. So Mayur Katariya is a meditation teacher, a filmmaker and a university leader whose path is rooted in Vedanta and non-duality. Holy moly, let's find out more about that. With over 25 years of practice, a master's in counselling, and a professional background in engineering and education, Mayur bridges ancient wisdom with modern life. He's also known for his social impact work, including the award-winning film Ek Aasha about the challenges of transgender people in India. And a bit of full disclosure here, Mayur is also my cousin-in-law. He's married to Jasmine, my cousin. So we're going to talk about some of the family drama as well.
Hopefully not.
Mayur, you have such an interesting background, so many different qualifications and experiences and interests. But I'm fascinated about your upbringing. So you grew up in Gujarat, India?
Gujarat, India, which is West India.
And what was your early experience of conflict like within your family and that cultural environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think many of us who grow up in urban landscape but with Indian colors, we are always taught about keeping peace, honoring the duty and honoring elders. And there is the separation of conflict in preference for so-called peace. And so very early on, I realized that it is more a separation as opposed to real peace. So there is an avoidance of conflict on every step of life because there is a quorum, there is an honor to maintain. So that is probably the summary of growing up. The relationship with conflict was on surface. It looks quiet and peaceful, but there is a lot going on in the background.
So what did that mean, Maya, in terms of your family with conflict? Was it just swept under the carpet, or you sort of pretending, or it wasn't fully addressed? You just had to go along with whatever was happening?
So not so much in our immediate family of five, but in India, you were never just that small family. You have your uncles, aunties, and another 300 people in your family. I think the conflict is more with those people who are really outside of your immediate unit. And there is a lot that takes place from your parents. They have to contribute so much to others because both mom and dad were eldest. So there was this responsibility for them to make sure that they look after the others. And my mom and dad had also moved from village to city to work in their government jobs. So they were very successful in that sense. So then they had this added responsibility of being successful eldest people who have to now contribute to the wider family. And they did their best. And so I think a lot of conflict came from that aspect where duty, honor, respect to elders was sort of pushed down on you as opposed to coming in a natural sense.
Mayur, what age were you when you came to Australia?
Yes, I must have been 23, 22 years old.
What did you notice was different about responses to conflict in Australia compared with back home in India?
Yeah, now we take this word for granted, the egalitarian society. But when you come to an egalitarian, true egalitarian society, you start understanding the nuances of the culture. So that was very eye opening that we don't even need to call our professors as sir. We call our lecturers as from first name and things like that. So, very early on, if you are awake and conscious, you can really see that this society is different. This society is not structured on every elder must be respected, even if they don't deserve the respect. I was very lucky because in my second year, I was elected in postgraduate association as a president. So university union advocates, etc., were my mentors, and they were the best mentors for somebody who's so new in university or in Australia. I learned a lot from them about social justice, about advocacy, something that I had no idea about growing up, and the shared responsibilities. So it was really good scaffolding for me to learn about the society early on from the best in the business. I was very lucky to have that opportunity because it is not afforded to every international student. And in fact, most international students are by design forced to live within their own community, and thus they don't have this access. So I was very lucky. I had this access and I made the most of it. I went to Kubopedi for anti-nuclear protest and so on. The society was very different, but as a young person, you take things in your strides, not necessarily comparing and creating theories and writing essays about it. But I could clearly tell that the way we manage conflict here is very different. So, you know, how you hear about these things in India that, you know, you need to be really good with the communication, but nobody knows, nobody has exemplified as to what does that mean. So here we can tell people are very, in general, people are good at putting issues in front of you and discussing it in an orderly manner and not allowing your emotion to heighten up. I guess growing up in India, conflict resolution would always mean that you try to suppress as much as you can, and then when you can't, you fight. That's how you manage conflict. That wasn't the case here, and I'm sure it's not the case in India now. But that's how I've seen so many conflict taken care of or not taken care of growing up. But it's different here.
So, Mayur, in terms of your work, have you had to deal with many conflict situations or difficult conversations, and how have you approached them, and how did you move away from that, I guess, learning that you grew up with in India and have to, I guess, adapt to a more assertive style of dealing with issues?
I must say, I still don't necessarily have assertive style of managing conflict, but I have my own way of managing conflict, which revolves around first and foremost knowing my own reaction to the conflict and managing them and not letting them take over the whole conversation or the way I feel about situation. So to me, it always starts from there. It always starts from managing the self and then allowing things to unfold, giving space to people, making them really heard so they know that they're heard, they have the space to be. And then I often find that from that space, conflict always de escalates and then we respond to it. So that is more my style. I am really bad at I'm not even going to say bad at because that's not I'm not even going to try doing it because I feel the way I do it works best for me because who I am, which is really going soft in it, going with open mind in any conflict situation and then respond to whatever new information that comes from them as opposed to whatever perception you had about the stories that you may have heard or read before. So that style, Scott, I must say it has evolved. It's not that I was like that. I remember entering into conflict wanting to win, wanting to convince, wanting to even escape. But I think as my practice in meditation and knowledge about spirituality improved, I have now found myself in a space where this is how I take care of conflict. And many times conflict don't feel like conflict. It just feels like maybe a slightly difficult conversation, slightly not so warm, difficult conversation. Yeah.
That's such an interesting insight. And I was actually going to ask before you mentioned it if meditation had something to do with that, because I think most people's reaction in conflict isn't to give the other person space, is to jump right in and argue immediately without giving them the time to be heard first. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how your meditation practice has contributed to your ability to do that?
That's a very good question. And it's very subtle. So those who haven't practiced may not be able to connect with this. But it is also confirmed by mindfulness literature. So the practice that is now very scientifically assessed by researchers. So essentially, it is about seeing objects of your mind, so your thoughts, your emotions, something that appears as opposed to something that defines you. So you as a subject is not object, and so you observe the objects. The thoughts have come, the emotions have come, and by doing this practice there is an ability in you to have this space between subject and object, and then to be able to know object as object and not necessarily hook in or buy into all the stories that objects are trying to tell you. So just by doing this practice sufficiently, you have this ability to have pause in between, to recognize the space in between. Otherwise, by default, what we do is we just buy into all the stories that whatever the objects want to tell you. And objects are very shifty, they're very smart. They're as smart as your thoughts and mind can be, right? So they come up with new convincing power and new debates, etc. But I think knowing them as temporary object deep down, it's not an information again, right? It is not. This is a lived wisdom, so lived experience, which is confirmed over and over and over and again in your meditation, which then creates, maybe this is a better analogy, that you know your subject, but your subject is always in background. But by doing enough practice, your subject then comes in foreground sufficiently that you don't really forget it. That you, even in your most elated moment, you still are a subject. Even in your saddest time, you still are subject. Your subject remains in foreground, and objects don't take over. So I know it sounds like a lot of theory, and those who haven't had the experiential understanding of this may struggle. But I think deep down we all sort of respond to this, because deep down we know that this sort of rhymes with my experience, but I just don't have enough experiential understanding of it to really to leave it.
I have this image in my head of the sort of real you, the subject, and then all these little pesky objects in conflict saying, "Get out of the way. This is true. This is what's happening. Don't listen. Do this, do that. Don't think. Don't pause." So I have this image of this internal conflict in your head, and the subject has to just go, "No, wait a minute. I'm just going to think a minute. Quiet, guys."
Yeah,
I like that, Sam. And I think, as Mayo knows, I've been traveling to India. I've been going the other way from Australia to India for many years, practicing meditation and mindfulness as well. And I think you're right, Mayo. I think that ability to be able to sit and not get so drawn into your thoughts and particularly emotions
mm,
in conflict. And Sam's done a lot of work on emotions in conflict. And I think that's the hardest bit. And I think the more we meditate and be able to watch things and let them pass and not see them as defining us or that they're necessarily even true or real is probably the thing that really helps in a conflict situation, because you're less likely to get sucked in by the thoughts, the stories, the emotions, and that's the area that I think most people struggle with in a conflict.
100% yes.
And people in conflict often believe the objects, don't they? They believe their initial thoughts and emotions are true and reality. And it's always much more complicated than that. But we often don't give ourselves or the other person, as you said, Maya, space to contribute to the nuance and the complexity.
True, true. You don't enter into conflict with somebody who has meditation, who has benefit of knowing subject object differently, or are able to regulate their own emotions, etc. So you meet them where they are, and there is that compassion and knowing their journey, and respecting their journey. I was that person few years ago. So there is really not much difference between us and them. And so meeting them and with that full compassion about for their journey and where they're coming from, that also helps because then also that removes labeling them, judging them harshly. So I think compassion also in the background it works.
Hey, Mayo, I like all that. I think it's fabulous. And I wonder if you've had a situation, you don't have to name names, but where even when you've brought all that knowledge and wisdom, I think is what you're saying there, to a conflict situation, you've still struggled. You brought the compassion, the empathy, the mindfulness, the non reactive, giving them space, and you've still struggled to work with this person or find a way forward. Have you had that problem?
I do have conflict stories to share from the film that I made, Scott. I was 20 years in Australia, so I was very attuned to the way we work in Australia. Then all of a sudden, I had to take myself to India with the whole production and very quickly make film within 1 month with limited budget, with cast that I haven't really met, with crews that I haven't really met before, and in a very different culture with 3 or 4 Australian colleagues who were also traveling with me. And I'm it. I'm everything stops with me. I'm the writer, director, and producer. And so you could imagine that context was very different for me. Even though I was Indian, I was very, in a sense, I knew the language, but culture, I sort of unlearned some of the cultural habits that people have in terms of work. And so there were a lot of conflicts at that time. And I had to remain calm and respond from the space of being subject. And I think I was successful in doing that. But there were times where the injustice of how people treat transgender people in India, the film was about transgender people in India, that injustice can sometimes prompt you to take actions. In those instances, you do become somebody who do not look like meditator because you are not fired up, but you are charged by the situation and you are taking affirmative actions. And in that, your action may feel like people call karma yogi. Karma means the one who believes in doing things as opposed to just closing the eyes and meditating. So I felt that when injustice prompts an action, it is different. You still have this emotional charge about things, but it is coming from the compassion space. So I had a lot of conflict, especially when hotels were not allowing our transgender actors to stay in hotel just because they were transgender people. We called so many hotels, and so we had a lot of trouble housing our actors. We had trouble even so when family friends found apartments, private apartments for them to stay. The community started in the society around them started causing problem for them. So there was just layers and layers of that sort of problems. And the film was about that. The whole film was about how hard it is, even though culturally there is space for transgender people in India. The story on ground is very different and very difficult for them. So there was a lot of heartaches at the time, but we pushed on. And the way transgender people who are known as kinner, so they are religious transgender people who leave their house and they live with a guru, a transgender guru, and then the guru teaches them their ways. So you learn a lot from how they have managed their lives and how they have managed their conflicts. And often their education has to stop as soon as they transition. And they usually in a grade 4 or grade 5, that tends to be the age when they leave their home and goes to guru. So their education stops. So with limited education, how they have managed their lives, how they have managed their conflicts, quite inspiring to learn.
Maya, I know you've got a strong background in social justice. What moved you to write this film and produce this film in particular?
So when you grow up in India, transgender people coming in your society for 5-10 minutes to ask for money in return for their blessings. So they come to your religious ceremony, to your birthdays, to your weddings, and they give you blessings and you give them money. And the whole idea is to get rid of them quickly. So that's how you sort of learn about them. And that is the extent of most people's interaction with transgender people in India, and it was mine too. But then, as I learned more about them as I was here, I realized that there is a lot of strength in having community of transgender people who support each other, and the culture had recognized their space for thousands of years. And then we realized that actually every indigenous community always had more than two genders. So then I was compelled to tell Indian transgender story to the global audience. So idea was to make an art film which is based on reality, where all the actors are transgender actors, something we can do. And I have been making short films, so I knew I could do it. So once the story was written and was assessed professionally in Australia, I had a lot of faith in a story and a script. And that was sufficient for me to then go and do casting. And so I did 2, 3 trips back and forth, and the film was made. The film was about how a transgender girl pursues her dream to become teacher in modern India. So can she do it? How hard it is for her to pursue that when she is in the home of Guru. So what happened was in 2014, Jasmine and I, we went to India and we did a very short documentary. So where we interviewed transgender people, and their stories then informed this story. So it was based on true events. So when we met with them first time and spent time with them, made documentary with them, that actually compelled us to then do more.
I had a look at the movie Mayur, and I was looking at how much conflict there is for transgender people, and I'd like to get your opinion. The conflicts I saw was obviously there's some inner conflict about who I am and that identity, the conflict with the family and the acceptability of someone who is transgender, and it feels like that's not often they're not often accepted. And then even when they did go to the transgender community, there was still conflict there, even around the education and that particular character, the lead character, wanting to, because they were smart and wanting that education. There was still conflict even within that community too. Is that the sort of conflicts do you feel are the challenges for transgender people?
Yeah, 100%, Scott. And then one more conflict is so internal conflict, family conflict with the guru and the community that they are staying in. There is very strict hierarchy there. And then conflict with the broader society. So all four layers have conflicts. The only conflicts that they may not have is when they are interacting with peers in their community. That's the safe zone. So in a film, we have shown that she has one safe place, which is her friend, that has become her lifelong sort of support structure. But Scott, you're right, and you verbalize it really well, that it starts with internal conflict as to who I am, and then it evolves, and then it manifests in all layers of their lives. And situation hasn't really improved. There are more legislative changes, etc., but legislative changes often take a lot of time to come to the reality at that level. So yeah.
I'm just wondering how you see it different or similar in Australia. I don't know how much connection you have with the trans community here and whether you feel there's more acceptance here or less acceptance or more rights for transgender people here. How do you see that, Mayo?
It's a very good question. Like, I feel because Australia is based on egalitarian society that is progressive, not burdened by religiosity, and often based on science. I feel even though Australia started behind from India in the sense of recognizing Indians have recognized Kinners for 5,000, 10,000 years ago, but we haven't progressed as fast as Western society, which it seems started to learn about them like 50 years ago and then progress so fast. So when you compare, really, when you compare transgender people life here and in India, people here are much more happier, relatively happier than people in India. And we also know that some international students from India who belong to LGBTQI community, they choose to come to Australia to have this freedom. So I think proof is in pudding. We can't say that Kinners in India are happier than transgender people or LGBTQI people in Australia. They're not. And even people from Southeast Asia, like Malaysia, Thailand, etc., who are from Indian background. I know of a community that they leave the community to come to Australia. And there is one guru in Melbourne who is a transgender guru who I had fortune to meet, and she came and opened our film in Australia. So she is one guru in Melbourne whose house is full of people who are questioning their identity, and they are always Southeast Asian people who are questioning their gender identity, and she beautifully supports them with no external support from other community members, just them supporting each other. And so that is a really good example of how the Western and Eastern way of supporting transgender people can come to fruition. So we only have one example of that. And I have this desire of making a documentary film for them, with them, which hopefully come to fruition soon.
One of the things that I think the film has done is created space for the transgender people in the film to be heard, to share their experiences and their story in a way that people can connect with them on a personal level and not just stereotype them and separate themselves. I'm wondering what the impact of that film has been, as far as you know so far.
Yeah, look, there has been more personal impact as opposed to wider societal impact. And when you go into making this sort of advocacy film, you have to be naive and you have to think, I'm going to change the world, because that powers it. But the reality often comes, even a big Oscar winning film on period in India, when the producer was asked as to what was the impact, did it change everything? And then she replies saying that no, the film usually only raises awareness, and that's a trigger that then brings on hopefully some changes. But society don't change just because a film was made. Those people who engage with the film, or those people who have worked in the film, their lives are changed forever. So those crew members, those cast members who have worked on the film, those people who have supported the film, seen the film, they are touched. But the problem is, the challenge is quite big, and my film probably only did a ripple effect. But I was very proud of the work that Disha, the main lead actress, did. So that was first time she stepped out of Delhi ever in her life, and so she first time sat in flight, came to Surat where we were making the film, and she did brilliant work. And then she became the first transgender actress to get a Best Actress award in major film festival. And then not much happened in her life. So she then had three, four roles in TV and films, etc. And she was happy with it. But as a 19-year-old, she had a lot of dreams. She felt that this will take her somewhere, but it didn't happen in a way she had envisaged. But it is slowly unfolding. Now she has a bigger profile in her community where people are coming to her for advice. And because the film is on YouTube, I know that a lot of people who are questioning are connecting with her directly and asking for help. So I think the change is made in a very sort of micro way. And that's all you could do. You could do something and hope for the best. And if it happens, but it often happens in a very micro way.
For me, watching a film, and I think for a lot of people, I think it can have an impact because you become aware of how challenging that would be. And you would use the word injustice earlier, that it feels so unreasonable and unfair and unjust, and just to be accepted for who you are. And I think a lot of communities feel like that. So if everyone can take a little bit of awareness away, I think that can have a huge impact.
100%, yes.
And Maya, how do you reconcile all the different things in your life? You've got a background in engineering, IT, leadership, meditation, filmmaking, transgender advocacy. How does it all fit together in what makes you you now?
Who are you? Well, it's a big question. Who are you?
You don't fit a
Yeah.
nice label. You're so multi-layered.
Yeah, I guess that's how we allow our life to take us where it wants to go. So you don't become that object in the way of the subject. Subject is manifesting itself and going with the flow. So you go with the subject, right? You don't become that object that objects it. So you get out of your way and things just happen. I guess I had no plan as to this is how my life will unfold, but I think getting out of your way is the best strategy I have, and then things just happen.
Great.
Nice, Mayor. And I guess it's that sort of relates to the meditation, doesn't it? Just allowing thoughts to flow and not getting too caught up in them and finding that inner peace, I guess. Where are you in your journey of finding that peace within and sitting in that rather than getting caught in your mind as much?
It's hard to quantify it, but I have realized over the years of practice that the realization or awakening or enlightenment that people often talk about is not one event. It's not something that, okay, from now on you are enlightened. It is a progressive pathway. And so, in most cases, it happens very slowly. It's like when you take a Panadol and then 5 hours later you realize that your headache is gone in the same way. So you continue on your pathway, and then you know that my peace is now not perturbed by micro issues, but even macro issues are not perturbing my peace. So then your foreground remains as what people would ascribe as happiness or peacefulness. So when your peacefulness and happiness is not perturbed by most of the life events, then you could say that, okay, I'm happy with this. I may not call this enlightenment or awakening or whatever, but the goal of any pursuit is happiness. So if I have landed myself into this space, this zone I call happiness, what else there is left to do? So I think often the colorful language that goes with awakening and enlightenment has a lot to do with the way we have misinterpreted it and misunderstood it. So Zen often talks about this very openly, but we always get drawn to the good story of enlightenment. Somebody was sitting under a banyan tree and they become enlightened, because those stories have a lot of effect. But this slow, steady, progressive awakening is what most practitioners are likely to experience in a lifetime, and we do not give a lot of limelight to that story because it's not very interesting.
Maya, most people are perturbed by conflict. Most people, when they perceive conflict in their life or coming their way in some way, do tend to get quite distressed by it. What is a mindful approach to recognizing that there's conflict, in your future?
There are three things that we could do in any conflict. And so it starts with accepting that there is conflict right now. And then you have three options. One is to do something about it. Second is give it a space and let it evolve. And then the third is remove yourself from the conflict. So really there are only three options that we have. But all of them starts with the acceptance of the conflict. So not fighting that conflict isn't a why is it here, no, conflict has now the existence, and it has been given permission to exist, and your duty is to acknowledge its presence, that it is here, you can't deny it, it is here. So that acceptance gives the space that it needs to be. And then you have three clear options. Do I do something about it? Do I give it a space to evolve? Or do I remove myself from the conflict? So if you come from that acceptance space, the conflict softens. The conflict would have space, and then you would have space to be who you are and then to respond from it. Often I find myself giving conflict enough space. So first, I may not do much about it for 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 weeks, whatever the context is. And then I would try to address it. And then if it doesn't work, then I would remove myself from it. So that is probably a very simplistic but very pragmatic way of dealing with conflicts, in my view.
And I might add something else you said earlier, Mayor, is that being able to sit back and reflect on where am I with it. And I guess that's part of the acceptance of sitting back. And I guess what I'd ask is, what's my contribution? How have I contributed? What's a wise way to manage or deal with this, rather than putting it off, suppressing it, or getting too caught in, overreacting, I guess, as well. So I like that you brought that up at the start, that self reflection,
Mm,
sitting back, and then using those meditation techniques to sort of get some distance so you're not so caught up.
True, true.
Such a powerful insight because most people do deny conflict, or they either ignore it, recognize that it's there, but just pretend that it's not there and hope it goes away. Or, as Scott said, they overreact because they see it as an attack on their subject, in your words, Mayur, rather than an object that's just in existence and we can choose how to interact with it. But I think there's also a lot of people in the world who deny conflict exists because we think of conflict as something bad that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't exist. And so when we deny conflict, we don't have an opportunity to make a considered response to it. So we have to say, yes, this is a conflict. It's not necessarily bad or escalated, but it could become that if I don't choose to respond wisely. Conflict has a bit of a bad reputation, I think, but I like the idea that your words where it has been given permission to exist. I love that. And now we had to choose how to respond to it.
Yeah. Because often the resistance happens from the story that we tell. How could this happen to me? I have been
Yeah.
always good to this person or to this situation. And none of it is important. It's just one thought telling other thought that it shouldn't exist. It is about acknowledging what is present, and conflict is always present. Sometimes we have conflict with the idea or the history of what had happened with us in the past, but it is still present here, as in you have a thought that is telling you a story that what happened in past was wrong, or I was mistreated, or so on. So it always starts with accepting the presence of this uncomfortable emotion or thought or situation, and then responding to it. So I think the subject object analogy is very interesting. It's very simple, but it's very powerful in the sense that everything that is causing conflict is like an object. But you, as a subject, don't really have to buy into all of it. It's not that you're ignoring it, but you're seeing it in its light and then responding to it.
And I hear some parallels there with narrative therapy and narrative mediation, where one of the techniques is externalizing or turning a concept, an emotion, or an experience into an object and looking at it as separate from yourself, which I think is what you're saying as well.
What is it called? Narrative?
Narrative therapy and narrative mediation. So, one of the key tools is externalization. So, instead of saying, I got angry, you would say, when the anger arrived, what did the anger want you to do? Or what was the impact of the anger? And it allows people to objectify rather than take it on as part of themselves. And that can be quite a useful technique.
I will look it up, Sam. I didn't know about this therapy.
I'll send you some information. You can look it up. Yeah, it's great. But I think it ties in with that subject, object, the narrative, the stories, all of those things align. It's funny, the more that you research in this area, the more you find parallels between different psychological concepts, different narrative concepts, different concepts from Buddhism and mindfulness. You know, it's so funny how a lot of people are saying the same things, but in different theoretical houses with different labels, but it all comes back to the same basic ideas.
Yeah, as they say, nothing is new under the sun.
Yeah.
We recycle, repackage the same information, but we refresh it for the
Mm.
new audience, for the new language, for the new culture that we have. But it is essentially the same age old reality that always is, and that only is that you're just writing a different narrative or writing the description of that reality in your current modern language. And that is what everybody has done, like all the philosophers and truth seekers and religious people have tried to do just that, is translated the reality as per today's culture's language. And that is the work that you are doing here in the context of conflict. But conflict is not a small topic. Conflict is pretty much everything that gives you stress in your life is attributed to conflict. Internal conflict or conflict with relationships, with people, or with situations, or with events, with country, etc. So yeah.
Although I must say, Mayor, every idea that me and Sam come up with is original. It's that mainly mine, actually. Sam steals a lot of mine, whatever.
I know, I
Okay.
just copy you, Scott. Yeah.
If I may just spend few more minutes on spirituality, but spirituality of indigenous people here in Australia. I'm constantly doing research on spirituality in different culture. So I came across this concept called Dadiri, and that's the word that people in Dali River region in Northern Territory use. And Auntie Miriam Rose Ungunmer has written an essay about it. And so Dadiri is exactly what mindfulness is. And so the reality or the truth that indigenous people have experienced in their own spiritual way was as valid as the reality and truth that Jains and Buddhists and Christian mystics and Sufis have experienced. So the value is in the reality. And because reality is one, it will always be when somebody finds the truth, it is that truth that is going to come across. It is not a different truth. It is not your truth is different from my truth. But because the truth of indigenous people was not necessarily written in text, we were so quick in not identifying it, not knowing it for what it is. So I felt that all culture across the globe have come across in their own way the same reality that Hindu claims that they were the first, or Buddhists claim they were the first, or mystics in Christianity would claim they're the first. But no, the reality was first. We were just subjects who are describing the reality.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyways, I
Interesting.
feel
And
that.
we overlay, don't we? We overlay all our stories on top of reality, and then we make
Mm.
those stories our reality, and then we fight with other people's reality, which is their
Yeah.
stories they've overlaid.
Oh, yeah, too much.
It's inspiring to know that deep down, everybody has the same reality, and it makes us recognize that we're all one humanity. So it's a beautiful place to end. I think we're nearly up for time, but what a fascinating discussion. Went from so many different topics and all came together in some beautiful wisdom at the end. Maya, when we finish our episodes, we usually ask our guests if you had one pearl of wisdom to share with the audience about conflict and how best to approach it. What would yours be?
I'd say many progressive people would start when they start creating space when conflict arises, if they're practicing mindfulness or narrative therapy, etc. I feel what happens is that they misunderstand what we could call suppression versus surrendering. So I feel when you start on your conflict journey, you are likely to fall in the trap of suppressing your feeling. Or you may saying, oh, I have done Scott's course and I'm not supposed to respond to it. And so I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to hide it. And that is suppression. Whereas what Scott meant was surrendering, was identifying what is to give space to what is. And surrendering is different from suppression. Suppression is ignoring, hiding it. It is again ego telling you that I'm above it, I'm beyond it, but it is not the true surrendering. Now, surrendering doesn't mean defeat, it means recognizing the true nature of the object of the conflict and responding from your true nature, from your pure subjectivity to the conflict, towards the conflict. So I think identifying suppression versus surrendering as you embark on your conflict journey, I feel would be a good practice to do. And we all start with suppression, right? Because we may not be as good at identifying the negative objects and doing something about it because we have heard stories and pointers about dealing with conflict. We start suppressing it. But it is again ego doing its own work, and it's not the real mindfulness.
Can I clarify the term surrender? So you're not meaning just give in. Say if you're in conflict with someone, you just give them whatever you want. It's more surrendering to the fact that this conflict does exist, recognizing the reality of it, what you do have control over and what you don't, and then making a decision based on, I think you said, your true nature or your real values rather
Yeah,
than what you think you should do or how to protect yourself. Is that
yeah.
what you mean?
Yeah, yes, Sam. So I guess the practical example could be somebody has criticized you, and the separation would look like, oh, it's fine, I'm spiritual, I don't react, but inside you are burning, right? Whereas surrendering would feel like you notice the heat is rising, So you know that the defensiveness is rising too, but you allow it to move through your space. And without identifying with that defensiveness that is rising, with that heat that is rising, you do not act from it. So you give it space so it pass through like a cloud pass through your sky, but you do not deny it either. So you do not say, I'm spiritual, I'm not supposed to feel this hate, I'm not supposed to feel this emotion. No, you are supposed to feel it because you are in this human body. Your duty is to identify what it is for it is. So allow the object, the cloud, to move through it and then respond to it, but not respond on behalf of that cloud. And that is the thing that we could do. Now, again, this will take time, right? Depending on the nature of conflict, it may take you 5 minutes for the cloud to disappear from your space, or it may take 5 days, or it may take 5 weeks. But I feel the real power is knowing, is when I mean surrendering, what I meant is surrendering to the true nature of the reality, that these are the objects they ought to pass, and then the right answer would come from my subject. And it's a lifelong journey, but I think even starting from separation is a good start, so that hopefully there will be space and then the real surrendering will come with the time.
Yeah, yeah.
I really feel like testing you out, Mayur, and trying to say something that will provoke you and see if it'll work.
I can see the cloud just floating by.
Who's your favourite cousin?
My favorite cousin is Scott.
Oh, that's prevented an unnecessary conflict. Phew.
You could have mediated, Sam.
I don't want to get involved in your conflict, Scott. I've got enough of my own. Maya, it's been such a joy talking with you today. You're such a fascinating human, and please keep up the good work that you're doing in social justice, in mindfulness, in advocating for the rights of people like transgender people in India and Australia. I hope you do make that follow-up film about the transgender woman in Melbourne. That would be a really interesting cross-cultural insight.
Yes, I think you have inspired me to do it, Sam. So I'll make some calls this weekend.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, as we always say at the end of our podcast, be like Maya, keep on working towards a more peaceful future.
And enjoy your conflict.
Yes.
Thank you, Maya. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Scott, for the opportunity.